Sangye chirdak soki chognam la, jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi, dagi chenyen gi pesonam ki, drola penchir sangye drupar shug. Sangye chirdak soki chognam la, jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi, dagi chenyen gi pesonam ki, drola penchir sangye drupar shug. Sangye chirdak soki chognam la, jangchu bardu dagni kyapsuchi, dagi chenyengi pesonam ki, drola penchu sangye drupar sho. Nick, you're muted.
Maybe that's better. So thank you, Bob. Good morning, everybody. And let's just do a couple of meditations on the breath. A couple of minutes meditation on the breath. So think, things do not exist as they appear. Yet the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. In order to do that, first I have to reach enlightenment myself. Therefore, I'm going to study and meditate and practice the teachings on the graduated path to enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, and particularly study this text, the 100 verses by Padampa Sangye. So last time, I think I mentioned, how the outlines of the Lamrim and the four main outlines, one of which is the second one of which is, the greatness of the Dharma teachings. So just to review those briefly, the Lamrim has there are 7 points. Actually, they're made in a group of 3 and a group of 4. I'm not quite sure why they're divided like that, but so there's the greatness of allowing you to realize that all the teachings are without contradiction. So, with the great Atisha having arranged all the Buddha's teachings in this step-like manner of the Lamrim, stages of the path to enlightenment, you can see how everything fits together. And I think, the Buddha's teachings are divided into so-called Hinayana and Mahayana, the lesser vehicle, and the great vehicle. So some people think calling it lesser vehicle is sort of pejorative, but it's not really meant like that. It means that the goal of the Hinayana or the lesser vehicle is one's own personal liberation from cyclic existence, whereas the goal of the great vehicle, Mahayana, is the enlightenment of all sentient beings, not just oneself. So sometimes Mahayana practitioners may feel superior to those of the Hinayana, or some, and I think there's some kind of feeling amongst some of the Hinayana practitioners that the Mahayana isn't the true teachings of the Buddha, was something sort of made up later by Nagarjuna or somebody. And also the Tantra, which is part of the Mahayana, obviously. That's really out there, it's sort of more Hinduism. So there are these wrong ideas. So by putting all the teachings into the Lamrim format, Atisha showed how, even if you want to be a Mahayanist and practice bodhicitta and attain enlightenment, you have to practice the teachings of the Hinayana, the lesser vehicle, first, as a foundation for the Mahayana. So that's one greatness, that all the teachings fit together and there's no contradiction. Then there's the greatness of allowing the scriptures to appear to you as personal instruction. So when we, remember, as I said last time, when the lamas listen to the teachings, they use it as a mirror for their mind and see how the topic that's being taught relates to their present situation. If they have delusions, which ones have to be removed, which ones have to be removed first, different things like that. So the way the Lamrim is set up, it can be seen as personal instruction. This is what I have to do now, and this is what I do next, and so forth. Then there's the greatness of allowing you to easily discover the true thinking of the Buddha. So we can see that, again, the way we're led on the graduated path is, these three sort of main goals. The path of, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche calls it, the path of the being of lesser capable being, the practitioner of least capability, at least wants to practice to ensure that they're not born in the next life, they're not born in the three lower realms, one of the three lower realms, but they ideally attain another perfect human rebirth, which we talked about last time, in order to continue practicing. So like I said, graduating from grade school through high school and university and so on, and up all the way up to enlightenment. So the true thinking really is that samsara is suffering, and the cause of suffering is delusion and karma, that there's a cessation of suffering, there's liberation from samsara, and there's a path to liberation. And liberation shouldn't be attained just for oneself, but in order to be able to liberate and enlighten all sentient beings. So then there's the greatness of allowing ourselves to save ourselves from what they call worst misdeed. And the worst misdeed, Rinpoche translates as abandoning Dharma. And so it relates to the first thing, thinking that, I'm a Mahayanist, the Hinayana teachings aren't for me. Sort of dismissing certain teachings as irrelevant. But in fact, if you look at the path, and then, our own sort of Dharma education, we have to start at the beginning, and we have to accomplish every teaching all the way up to enlightenment, all the stages of the path. And, we can't criticize our Tantra, like I said before, Tantra is something made up, or it's Hinduism, or anyway, the things I mentioned before. So abandoning Dharma is considered the worst thing, because it creates the karma not to meet the Dharma again in future lives. Also, I think you consider, when we study the teachings on Guru devotion, some of the worst karma that we can create is with the object of the Guru. It's so hard to meet a true, genuine, enlightened teacher. So if we then see that teacher as an ordinary being, and, criticize what we see as bad habits or mistakes, or get angry with the teacher, or don't do what he tells us to do, this creates quite heavy negative karma, and the cause not to meet that teacher or another teacher again for a long time, which is certainly, we don't want that to happen. I remember in one of the early courses I did, maybe the Copan courses, after my first course, there was a textbook called The Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun, and it was kind of this bound mimeograph book put together by the students from the second course. I was at the third course for the first time. And I thought it was a bit rough, you know, and I went to Rinpoche and I said, you know, this is a life-changing book. You know, so the way the course went was Rinpoche would read from this textbook and then expound on a sentence or a paragraph for, you know, a few minutes or an hour or the whole discourse, 2 or 3 hours. And uh, so that's how the course went. And then, so after the course, I said, you know, it's a life-changing book, but, you know, it could do with a bit of an edit, you know, not that I was a big editor or anything, but, and he said, yeah, well, that was put together by the students from the previous course. I have my own idea of what I'd like it to be. So if you'd like to work with me on it before the next course, before the fourth course, you know, we could do that. So, you know, certainly that appealed to me quite a lot. So between the third and the fourth courses, I spent, my girlfriend and I, Yeshikado, spent several hours every day rewriting the whole thing from beginning to end. In the end, it didn't turn out to be that much different, frankly, but Rinpoche cleared up some points and we structured it a little bit better, you know. So I was a little familiar with it. So then the fourth course or the fifth course, so between some of the next courses, we did further work on the book. And then about the seventh or the eighth course, about 77 or 78, he stopped using the book. And later he said, when he was talking about the early courses, he said, in those early courses, I felt that I wasn't really teaching, that, you know, Lama Yeshe was coming through me, and that's the way I was giving the teachings. And it was true. When he'd start the discourse, he'd close his eyes and he'd rock backwards and forwards, and speak fairly slowly, would repeat himself, and then it'd be punctuated by sort of, oh yeah, oh yeah, like that. It was, you know, that was his style in those early courses. Then later on, he didn't present the teachings like that, and that was around the time he stopped using the book, and also around that time he went to Missouri in India, Missouri, and one summer did quite a long retreat. And then when he came back, Lama Yeshe said to Sister Max, so Mummy Max, everyone's heard of her, the nun that used to, American nun who used to support Copan in those early days, pretty much single-handedly. They called her Mummy Max, and she was kind of the mother of all the little monks and looked after everybody, the lamas. He said to her, when Rinpoche came back from this retreat, he said, Mummy, we really have a baby Buddha now. So I don't know exactly what that meant, what happened in that retreat, but it was around the time that he seemed to stop channeling Lama Yeshe, as he put it. Anyway, so one day during the discourses, he said something that I thought contradicted what he'd said before in the textbook. And then afterwards, I was with him in his room, and I started berating him for. I can't even believe I did this. You know, you said this, but you know, it's really like this, like that, you know. And then, you know, so I went on for quite a little shrill, you know, and then after listening to me for about 30 seconds or something, he very humbly said, "Oh, it's possible to make a mistake." So at the time, I thought he was saying that he made a mistake. But as I thought about this later, I think he thought I was making a mistake criticizing him like that. So as far as I'm concerned, very possible to make a mistake. But, so I know what kind of karma that created. There was another time in 75, the Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa did what was probably their most extensive teaching tour to the West. They circumambulated the globe. And I got to go along as the roadie and the meditation assistant and lead the discussion groups and stuff. And so that time we went to we left Kopan, went to Darjeeling and to the monastery where Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche had met Zena, the first Western student. They'd left some stuff there, so they picked that stuff. Then we went to Dharamsala, and they saw His Holiness the Dalai Lama, got advice for the upcoming tour. And then we went to Bangkok. There was a weekend seminar in Bangkok, and then they were teaching in Australia, New Zealand, California, Indiana, London, Switzerland, Italy, and then back to India. So it was about 8 or 9 months on the road. And as we at the Kopan courses, students took the 8 Mahayana precepts every day for the last 2 weeks of the course. Just eat one meal and keep the 8 precepts. And the meal has to be taken by midday. So in the courses in the West, usually it was like, if it was a 2 or 3 week course, which they usually were, the last week was taking precepts. So the Swiss course was 2 weeks, and the second week was taking precepts. And so one of those days, Lama Yeshe came and gave the morning discourse. And so the cooks were getting lunch ready to be served at midday at 12. And so Lama Yeshe was talking, and I was sitting there down on the floor by the throne. And, as it came 12 o'clock, I was going, Lama, precepts like that. And he kind of looked at me and ignored me completely and kept on talking. And then, another 5-10 minutes went by, and I was going, Lama, wrap it up. And he kept talking. So another 10 minutes was like 20 past 12. And I was thinking, oh, the cooks, they've made all this effort. The food will be getting cold or spoiled or whatever, and you're going to make the people break their vows, So I said, Lama, come on, it's like, and then he looked at me, and then he made this. He pressed his thumb down on the throne like he was squashing a bug, and again dismissed me and talked for another 10-15 minutes, And of course, everyone was laughing, and I got really embarrassed. And so anyway, eventually it stopped, probably about 1:45 or something. So then Lama left, and then where the teachings were was there was an upstairs, and there was stairs going down to the ground floor where the dining room was, and there was a landing sort of halfway down. So I went down. I led Lama out, and then as he came down the stairs, I turned around to yell at him for, and in my mind I was thinking, you're making these people break all the precepts, you're making them create. I had all this going on in my mind, what I was going to say. And he looked at me in shock, He said, don't say anything. Don't say anything. So I didn't say anything, So I was saved from one of the worst misdeeds like that. You know, so that there's a teaching that says that you know, being close to the guru, like being the guru's attendant, is one of the greatest blessings and one of the most dangerous places to be. It's kind of like a piece of paper getting close to a candle, you know, and if you get too close, the paper burns. So it's very, when you're around, you know, I was with Lama Yeshe Lamso for 9 months, day in and day out. So when you, it's very easy to see them as ordinary people. You know, they go to the bathroom, they eat, uh, you know, they cough, they look like normal beings, and so it's very easy to forget that they're really enlightened beings. It's how we see our gurus, you know, as Buddhas, and anything that appears ordinary, you know, they appear ordinary for in order to relate to us, but uh, we shouldn't see them or treat them as ordinary beings, you know. So if you very close, it's difficult. It's easy to forget that. One year, 1977, my mother. I was living in Delhi, and my mother came to India, and then I took her to Dharamsala to meet His Holiness and Ling Rinpoche and Trijang Rinpoche, His Holiness's two tutors. And after, and His Holiness gave her a private interview, 45 minutes, which you could do in those days. And uh, then afterwards, she came out and said, "If he's a Buddha, why does he wear glasses? Like you have perfect eyesight." I said, "Well, you know, it's for our benefit." Okay, so the worst misdeed. So then the Lamrim is complete because it contains all the teachings of Sutra and Tantra. That's one of the other greatnesses. And then it's easy to put into practice because it emphasizes taming the mind, controlling the mind. So we have all these graduated meditations that help us. And, you know, the way it's set up, it's so psychologically logical, you know, that, you know, the first thing is the teaching on guru devotion, which Lam Tsongkhapa called the root of the path, and then having become devoted to the teacher, what do we do? Then there's then there's teaching on stimulating us to extract the essence from the perfect human rebirth. There's teachings on the perfect human rebirth, and then you know, then the three levels of the path that we always mention. You know, the path of the lesser, intermediate, and great practitioners, greatest capability. And so then within them, you know, impermanence and death, three lower realms, refuge, karma, and so on, you know. So so after we have the teaching on the perfect human rebirth, so we feel kind of, oh, this is amazing. I have this incredible life. But then the next teaching is, yeah, but it's very hard. It won't last long, and it's very hard to find again. So then comes the teaching on impermanence and death, and then the teaching. Then okay, I'm going to die, but then I'll practice in the next life. But no, because what comes is then the teaching on the three lower realms comes, because much more likely that we'll be reborn in the lower realms than in the upper realms. And so there's that extensive teaching. So then we're terrified of that. So how can we get out of this terrible situation? Then there's teaching on refuge. So we take refuge, and then what's the obligation of refuge? To follow karma. So, the whole thing's set up like that. So, yeah, anyway, you know that. So that's one of the great features of the Lamrim, that it emphasizes getting gradual control over our mind and progressing on the path. And then it's said to be superior to other teachings because it contains the lineages of the two great charioteers, Nagarjuna and Asanga. So it has, the wisdom and method lineages. So, the Buddha gave the wisdom teachings to Manjushri, and then he gave them to Nagarjuna, and then Nagarjuna passed them to Aryadeva, and then down through all those, the lineage, the wisdom lineage. You can see that in the back of Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, there's a chart with all the lineage lamas that the teachings came down. So then it came to Atisha, and then Maitreya gave the those 5 great teachings to Asanga. When the story of Asanga, he was meditating in the cave for 12 years, and trying to see Maitreya. It's easy for us. Maitreya's right there, but it wasn't so easy for Asanga. It took 12 years, and then Maitreya took him to Tushita, to the Pure Land, and gave him these different teachings, Abhisamaya Lankara and Uttanamchi, Churninamche, Mahayana Sutra Lankara, and Uttara Tantra. There's 5 great texts, and so then he gave them those teachings to his brother Vasubandhu, and then they came down the method lineage, also to Atisha, and then Atisha brought both these lineages to Tibet and put them in his first, in the Lamrim lamp, the path, and so on. So Lamrim teachings contain these 2 important lineages, method and wisdom, or emptiness and bodhicitta, basically. So we need to the enlightened being, the Buddha, has the 2 bodies, the Rupakaya, Dharmakaya, and Rupakaya, the holy body of wisdom and the holy body of form. So the Dharmakaya, the body of wisdom, is the culmination of the wisdom lineage, and the Rupakaya, which has the Nirmanakaya, the manifestation body, like Shakyamuni Buddha. Then the Buddha can manifest in many different ways. And then there's the Sambhogakaya that's resides in the Pure Land, Akanishta, and has 5 attributes. I don't know if I can remember them all. Only gives Mahayana teachings, surrounded by bodhisattvas. Only gives teachings to bodhisattvas. Can only be seen by bodhisattvas. Has the 32 major 80 minor marks of the Buddha. It lasts until samsara ends, and only gives Mahayana teachings. Did I say that? Anyway, you can look that up. But 5 attributes. So those 2 form bodies are the culmination of the method lineage. Collection of merit. So we collect the merit of wisdom and the merit of method, which is basically compassion, bodhicitta side. So in order to become a Buddha, we have to have both lineages developed fully to get those bodies of the Buddha. So, these points are made in order for us to, have faith in the Lamrim teachings. So they're the second of the major outlines. And then there's, how to study and how to teach. So, so in those teachings, in the third outline, there are three. The example of the vessel or the pot. So there are kind of three faulty ways of listening. One is not to be like an upturned pot, so that when you try to pour water in it, it doesn't go in because it's face down. So in other words, our mind shouldn't be closed. Like I said last time, we think, oh, I've heard this before. I know this topic. Why doesn't he teach something else? Something new, something more interesting, because I've heard this before. Or so if you have sort of the pride of thinking, oh, I know this, and without having realized it, just having intellectual knowledge, then if your mind is closed, even though you need to hear that teaching again, it doesn't go in because your mind is closed. So it bounces off. So that's one way not to listen. Then the second way not to listen is like the pot is the right way up, but it's dirty inside. So that if you pour something in, like milk or water or whatever, it gets spoiled because there's dirt and filth inside the pot. So that means listening with the wrong motivation. Listening to to get knowledge so that maybe you can show off to other people, or just so you can maybe beat somebody in debate, or some people study Buddhism at university to get a degree and then become some kind of professor or something. It's just a worldly motivation, just done to benefit this life, and for no thought of future lives or benefiting other sentient beings. So it's done out of attachment and self-cherishing. So listening with that sort of motivation, or that pollutes the teaching that you do receive. So that's also not. So we should listen, as we try and do every time. We do these prayers at the beginning. Again, some people might think, why do we have to do these prayers? It's just wasting time. Wouldn't it be better just jump straight into the teaching so we can get more knowledge out of the time? But especially the ones we do were put together by Geshe Tsoga, and Geshe Tsoga said this is our Kurukulla tradition. So later on, as the years went by, the FPMT education department came out with these other prayers, and Lamzopa Rinpoche came out with this morning practice with different practices to do, prostrations and short Lamrim meditation, and blessing the speech and blessing the rosary, and what's it called, a method to transform suffering life into happiness, something like that. So the FPMT were, and it's amazing practice. I mean, I don't do it, but I wish I did. but I'm kind of too lazy. But still, Geshe-la said that these prayers that we just did before, this is a Kurukulla tradition, so we should try and maintain that tradition. And there are prayers for purification and prayers for creating merit. So, so it's sort of a preparation for the teachings that the lamas give that follow. Not my blah blah blah, but the teachings that Geshe-la gives and so on. It's if we purify and enrich our mind for 10, 15 minutes before the teaching, there's much more benefit from then listening to the teaching. It has a better chance of penetrating our mind and taking root. And it's also to make sure that we're not listening with worldly motivation, but we're listening with bodhicitta. So, sometimes we recite the prayers and we don't really think about the meaning, and they become a little bit ritualistic or done by rote, and so that's why usually before I start, I would just like to do a couple of minutes of meditation to sort of on the breath to clear our mind, and then just reaffirm the bodhicitta motivation that, the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings out of suffering to enlightenment, after reaching enlightenment myself, so generate bodhicitta like that. What I said today also at the beginning was that things do not exist as they appear. I heard His Holiness recently said that when he wakes up in the morning, that's the first thing he tries to think, is to remind himself. I mean, he probably doesn't need reminding, but he's explaining this as a teaching, as advice to us, how we could think that things do not exist as they appear. So just as a reminder, not to get caught up in appearances and worldly activities, to try and keep our mind in the Dharma and focused on future lives as being more important than this one, and the happiness of other sentient beings as being more important than our own. So usually I try to remember that. So I've said before, I have this amulet that I take off at night because you don't want to lie on it. It has a collection of powerful sutras and mantras inside here, in this little thing. And so when I put that on, I try to think things do not exist as they appear. If I didn't do this, I wouldn't remember to think it. And things don't exist as they appear yet, even though things don't exist, they appear. And still, sentient beings are suffering. So yet I try and today I will try and work for the enlightenment of all sentient beings. So try to remember emptiness and then generate bodhicitta. And, there's a tiny imprint of those two important lineages that you put into your mind, So then the third fault of listening the wrong way is being like a leaky vessel. So even if the vessel's up the right way and it's perfectly clean, if there's a hole in the bottom, what you put in goes out. So if we don't retain what we read, what we study, what we hear, then it doesn't do us much good. In one ear and out the other, as they say. So that's also a wrong way to think. We need to retain what we hear. I think sometimes when the Lamas taught Lamrim, I think when Pabongka Rinpoche taught liberation in the palm of your hand, I think it's been abbreviated for the book, but at the end of the teaching, he would summarize what he taught. And in the next session, because that teaching was given over a period of, I think like 3 weeks or something like that. It was in 1921. And he gave it he lived in Lhasa. He had his Sarah monastery was there, and then he lived a little bit away up. I've been to his place a couple of times. He lived up a hill a little bit away from Sarah monastery, and there was a big space in front of his house. So I think that's where he gave that teaching. There, thousands of monks were there in 1921. And then one of his closest disciples, Trijang Rinpoche, Science Trijang Rinpoche, edited the teachings, and they were published in Tibetan in 1958. It took 37 years. So that always gives me heart when I think how slow, because some of my work is editing teachings, it never goes as fast as I would like. So I wish I was more productive. But remember, it took 37 years to edit that book, so it hasn't taken me that long to do anything. So then it was translated into English, a couple of different translators. So then at the start of the next teaching, then he would again review what he'd taught the previous day and then give an introduction to what he was going to do that day. And so he went over the material 3 or 4 times, each bunch of materials. So, so that's how, tried to make sure that people retained what was taught, So then also there are 6 helpful attitudes that we're supposed to listen with. So the first one is to listen to the teachings as if we're sick, as if we're a patient, and we're sick with the delusions, with ignorance, attachment, aversion, pride, jealousy, all kinds of wrong views. The 6 principal delusions and then the 20 secondary delusions. So we have these, well, Buddha said there are 84,000 delusions. So I've never seen them enumerated, but there's this project going on, the 84,000, translating all the Kangyur and Tengyur, they're doing the Kangyur at the moment. It's called the 84,000 project. So 84,000 teachings, I guess, to combat the 84,000 delusions. So when we established Wisdom Publications in Nepal in 75, and then in 1978, Lama Yeshe at Kopan we established it, and then in 78, Lama Yeshe said it'd be better if it was set up in Delhi. So at that time, he'd sent me to Delhi to start Tushita Meditation Center. I was very happily established at Copan. I had this geodesic dome that I lived in that some students had built a couple of years earlier. And I was editing Rinpoche's Lamrim teachings. And in early 77, Lama Yeshe called me into his room and he said, I think we need a center in Delhi. And I was like, oh, yeah, sounds like a good idea. Why? He said, well, we need to repay the kindness of the Tibetan people to the Tibetans. First of all, they were kind because they gave us the Buddha, and the Dharma developed in India. And then after about 1,500 years of developing in India, or 1,500 years, it went to Tibet. And then as it developed in Tibet, all three levels of teaching, the Hinayana, Mahayana Sutra and Mahayana Tantra, it gradually died out in India. And then, of course, when Tibet was occupied by the Communist Chinese, starting in 1950, really, after Mao came to power, after the revolution, they started infiltrating Tibet. And then in 1959, there was this big uprising against the Chinese occupation, and that was crushed. And then all Tibetans had to leave. I mean, a lot of Tibetans, His Holiness, his tutors, all the great lamas, many of the great lamas, 100,000 Tibetans, monks and lay people, monks, nuns, lay people. They were given refuge in India. So the Indians were very kind again to the Tibetans, taking them in and giving them land and giving a place to develop all the monasteries in South India, and giving a home to His Holiness in Dharamsala, and allowing the establishment of the Tibetan government in exile, all these things. So, the pity of it was that Dharma had basically largely Buddhism had largely disappeared from India over this time. So the teaching had been preserved and developed in Tibet. So been sort of flushed out by the Chinese. So now we should take the opportunity to develop and introduce Dharma teaching starting in the capital, in Delhi. So I thought, oh yeah, it sounds like a good idea. So then he said, then I want you to go to Delhi and start the center. But then all of a sudden it didn't seem like such a good idea. But because, the way the centers like Kurukulla Center didn't develop because of the ambition of the lamas to sort of build this international Dharma empire. It came from the students. So like in 1974, the lamas did their first trip to the West. And I mentioned, no, I didn't mention, but in 1974, they came to the States and to Australia and New Zealand. So they gave a bunch of teachings all over in the States. And those teachings were later published as Wisdom Energy, the first Wisdom Publications book. It was published in 1976. And that was the founding of Wisdom Publications in Copan. And there was a 1-month course in Queensland in Australia. I don't think there were other 1-month courses in Australia for in subsequent years, but I don't think there was a 1-month course which was kind of a mirror image of the Copan course, which was 1 month. anywhere else in the world. So after that first course, the students said, can we start a center? And there was some land nearby. So that's when Chenrezig Institute was established. Just had its 50th anniversary last year. And then in that 75, the year I mentioned, I traveled with the Lamas. Then there was a center came in Melbourne and in New Zealand. The seeds were actually planted in 74, but the center really developed in 75. There was a 3-week Lamrim course. And then in England, so in 75, the Lamas gave teachings in California and Indiana, but there wasn't a center developed. In Vajrapani Institute in California only came after a 77 course in Yucca Valley. In England, Manjushri Institute started after the weekend seminar. In Switzerland, there was this course, but Lama didn't want to start a center. Some students asked, but Lama didn't want, because Geshe Rabten had a center in Switzerland, so Lama felt Geshe Rabten was Lama's guru, so he didn't feel it was appropriate to start a center there. There was already Geshe Rabten, so how could you improve on that? And then in Italy, Lama Tsongkhapa Institute started. The center started in after that course in 75. So the students would ask the Lamas, can we start a center? Then he'd say, yeah, sure. Sometimes he said no, but sometimes, yes, but it's your baby. You have to organize it. You have to finance it. You have to make it legal entity, blah, blah, blah. You have to look after it. We'll come and teach, but you have to do all that infrastructure, set up the work. So there weren't any students in Delhi. Nobody was asking for a center. It was Lama's idea. So I had to give birth to this baby. Anyway, it took a couple of years. There was no money, and there was one Indian student who was not, she was she liked the Lamas, Indian lady, who had some contacts, and so she was extremely helpful. I mean, we couldn't have done it without her, but basically it was very hard to. It took a couple of years to get the center going, and I gave in March of 78, I gave a 10-day course at some rented building. Remember, Rabina was my assistant, and she'd come to Delhi to help me as well as the center. We wanted to establish wisdom publications. So she was running around looking for printers and typesetters and so on. But then later on in the year, Lama changed his mind and decided we should establish wisdom publications in England. So then by that time we had this big center in Cumbria. So wisdom moved to Manjushri Institute. Anyway, I can't remember why I'm telling this story, but we should when we're listening to Dharma, we should have the attitude that we're a patient. We're sick with these 84,000 delusions, and the Dharma. The second attitude is to think of the Dharma as the medicine to cure these the 84,000 delusions, and that the teacher explaining the Dharma, our lamas, are like a doctor prescribing this medicine. And then we should also have the attitude that by practicing the Dharma, we'll be able to overcome the delusions, in other words, cure the illness, and then the fifth attitude is to think that the Buddhas are truly holy beings, and that we can really trust the Dharma teachings having come from an enlightened being who understands the minds of all sentient beings, and who fully knows the Dharma completely, and is like a totally worthy object of refuge. So we should have that attitude, and again, confidence in the Dharma that we practice in order to cure the medicine, that it will really work if we understand and practice it correctly. And then we should also pray that this Dharma will last for a very long time, in fact, until all sentient beings are free from samsara and have attained enlightenment. So these are some of the aspects of that third outline of the Lam Rim. How to listen, and then how to teach the Dharma. Okay, so at this point, maybe you should look at this book. So the 10th verse. So we were talking before about abandoning our family and country, and going off in solitude, and not being attached to home and country. So I was going to. So the next one says 10. As parents, all beings in the six realms have cared for you. People of Tingri, don't relate to them with your ideas of I and mine. So I was just going to look at so in Lama Zopa Rinpoche's textbook, which I was mentioning before, The Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun, that he used to use in the early courses. And if you don't know, you can find it online at lamayeshi.com. When we're trying to develop bodhicitta, we first have to practice the equilibrium meditation, and then we can practice. There are two ways of developing bodhicitta, and actually Lama Tsongkhapa combined them into like 11-step method. And did anyone here meet Ribu Rinpoche? He was. So I mentioned His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche as the editor of Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. He was one of the close disciples, probably the closest disciple of Padampa Rinpoche, who came out of Tibet, but also Ribu Rinpoche. He was imprisoned by the Chinese for many years, 20 years or so. But then he eventually came out, I think, in the 80s. And I see Laura there. Richard was very close to Ribu Rinpoche. And also Geshe Tachin, who was in New Jersey, and actually his group translated Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. He'd promised Trijang Rinpoche that he would translate it. So at Wisdom, we also translated it. Michael Richards, we were publishing it. So they asked us if we minded if they also translated and published Liberation. So of course we said we didn't mind. So there are two translations available. There's one, Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, and then there's the Geshe Tachin's group called Liberation in Our Hands, in 3 volumes. So it's good to have those two translations because they're a little different, and it's 2 different views of the same thing. And the notes in the Geshe Tachin translation are especially useful for Dharma nerds. So Ribu Rinpoche was kind of the reason we have Kurukulla Center. You know, when Lama Zopa Rinpoche was in Boston in '89, we just moved Wisdom Publications from London to Boston, and there was a Geshe Jampa at Milarepa Center, and he used to come to Boston once a month and give teachings to about 25 or 30 people, and then he'd go back to Milarepa. There were very few people there. So he came to see Lama Zopa Rinpoche in '89 and said, you know, I've been coming down here once a month and there's quite a lot of people. I go back to Milarepa Center, not much happening there. So it seems better to me that I would be based in Boston where the people are and go up to Milarepa once a month. So Rinpoche agreed, and then he called me over and said, look, Geshe-la thinks we should have a center in Delhi, in Boston, I agree. So, so then he asked me to see if I could get Kurukulla Center going. So then the Geshe came down and got him an apartment at Cleveland Circle in Brighton, and then he started giving teachings at, so it was the same thing, Sunday morning teachings. He'd give Lam-Rem teachings at Wisdom Publications office, which was in the corner of Newbury and Mass Ave at that time. He had a bookstore with quite a big space there. And then on Wednesdays, he'd give sort of philosophical teachings at his apartment. So that was how the center started, you know. So that was really at the request of the Geshe, but he had a few very devoted students who were quite instrumental in looking after him and helping get the center going. So after some time, then actually 6 months later, Geshe Jampa was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and so he had surgery, and then he took 6 months to recover enough to give teachings, and he gave teachings for another 3 months, and then he got sick again, and then he passed away about a year after being diagnosed. So then we just had visiting teachers come, some Geshes and Western monks and nuns and so on. And then we had meditation every Monday night. We did that for a few years. Mostly I used to lead those. And then Geshe Tsulga came. And so Geshe Tsulga came and we shared him with Milarepa Center and Padampa Center in North Carolina. And then we did teachings. Then after 3 years, he decided his contract was up and he decided to stay in Boston. So then after 2 or 3 years of teaching in Cambridge, we really wanted to find a center, but it was quite difficult. So then Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, we should invite Ribu Rinpoche to Boston to give teachings and initiations. and that will remove obstacles to finding a center. So he came in 99 or 2000 and gave a series of teachings, and then encouraged us to work together. And so then after some time, a few months or a year, I can't remember exactly, then we found the center that we have in Medford. So that was Ribush clearing obstacles. So that was how we got the center. So anyway, so first we do the equilibrium meditation to develop equanimity and see all sentient beings as equal. But then when we start, so I mentioned Ribush because there's a book published, How to Develop Bodhicitta or something, where he explains these 11 techniques of developing bodhicitta. So I think that's online too. So there's the 7 techniques of cause and effect. So 6 causes and the 1 effect, developing bodhicitta. And there's the Shantideva technique of exchanging self for others. There are 4 parts to that. So in the 7 techniques, so here in the book, it says all sentient beings have cared for you as a mother, implies. So the first of the 7 techniques of cause and effect is how are all sentient beings my mother? So in Rinpoche's book, Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun, he says that they've all been our mother is shown by scriptural authority. So then he quotes Nagarjuna as saying, if we divided this earth into pieces the size of juniper berries, quite small, the number of these would not be as great as the number of times that each sentient being, each of the infinite sentient beings, has been our mother. So there are billions and trillions of these berries. If you chop up the earth into pieces that size, and the number of times each sentient being's mother is more than that. So that's what Nagarjuna said. So, we can think he's making it up, or we can study Nagarjuna's teachings to see how incredibly valid a teacher he really is. And he's sort of head of this wisdom lineage. So it's unlikely he's going to tell lies, or make stuff up that isn't true. So that's so His Holiness says there are, if you want to know if something's true or not, there are three ways of determining whether something's true or not. And one of the early questions we have is the mind beginningless? Are there past and future lives? In fact, is the mind beginningless and endless? So that's something that we're never taught in the West by our, by our parents, our society, our schools, our universities. They don't teach that. So generally, we think there's only one life, just this life, just what we can see, what we can experience. So then when someone comes and says, oh, no, you have past and future lives, we're pretty skeptical of that. But it's a fact. And without understanding that, fundamental teachings really don't make sense, especially teaching on karma, which encompasses past and future lives. And it's, one of the very key teachings of Buddhas, especially in conventional reality. So we have to understand the fact of past and future lives. So how do we approach the understanding? So the best way to understand that there are past and future lives is personal experience. So at the moment, it's hard for us to remember what we had for breakfast a week ago, unless you have the same breakfast every day, I guess. We certainly don't remember what we had breakfast this day 30 years ago. And so there's a lot of stuff that we've experienced, but we don't remember because our minds are very occupied by more recent experiences and delusions and just bad memory. They're not clear. Our minds like a lake that's in a storm that's just whipped up by hurricane force winds, and all the mud and everything from the bottom of this lake is just stirred up, and you can't even see below the surface because the surface is full of froth and bubbles and flotsam and jetsam, broken branches and leaves, and it's you can't see, and because the wind is just constantly whipping up this lake. So our mind is just like that. It's constantly being kept in turmoil by attachment and aversion and ignorance and all these other delusions that we have, the 84,000. So if we try to look into our mind to remember things, it's virtually impossible to remember much. So with the lake analogy, if when the wind stops blowing, the lake starts to settle down, and then the froth and the bubbles disappear, and you can see the surface of the water, but it's still very muddy. But if you give it another few days or another few weeks, gradually the mud and other stuff in the water settles, and it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. So you can see, 20, 30, 40, 50 feet, all the way down to the bottom, if it's, really clear lake. So if we can stop agitating our minds, and, the way we start to do that is just simple breath meditation, just try to focus on the breath and let everything else kind of fall away. Gradually our minds will begin to clear, and we will be able to remember what we had for breakfast last week, Not very important, but it's a sign that things are happening, going in the right direction. So if we can develop single-pointed concentration, which can, if we really set our mind to it, and the Shinny chart with the monkey and the elephant, and developing the 9 stages of shamatha, or mental tranquility. If we follow those practices, maybe in a year or 2 years or 3 years, depending on the individual, we might be able to develop single-pointed concentration. But of course, it's not just enough to sit down and meditate. We also have to have a lifestyle conducive to that. So that's why we have to develop um, uh, we have to develop um, pure morality. We have to, and so we take vows and precepts. So as I said last time, the more precepts, the better. The longer we keep them, the better. The more purely we keep them, the better. The more quickly we purify broken precepts, the better. So this fundamental practice of morality, we talk about the three higher trainings, the way to escape from cyclic existence: conduct, concentration, and wisdom. So pure conduct is the basis of concentration, developing concentration. If we're still indulging our senses, and then we try to sit down and meditate, our attachment won't let us, won't leave us alone. So it'd be very difficult to keep our mind focused on the object of concentration. So, if we also, most likely we need to practice under the guidance of an experienced teacher, a teacher who has already developed single pointed concentration, ideally, who can tell us if we're going in the right direction or not. Check in every now and then with your experiences. And there are these 9 stages that we achieve. So say we achieve single pointed concentration, our mind becomes so clear that not only do we remember even the early years of this life. I mean, most of us don't remember first 1, 2. Some people remember things from the second year of life, I've heard. First thing I remember was I was nearly 4. And my first memory, which was quite a shock, was when my mother brought my young brother home from hospital. I thought I was the only one. And all of a sudden, this competition is introduced. So my first memory is my mother stepping out of the car with this thing in her hands. So that kind of, I think, seemed to obliterate the memory of anything that happened before. But if I were to develop single point of concentration, I'd remember previous events, and people have remembered, before they start developing single point of concentration, they can remember things from when they were 2 or 3 or whatever. Then they can remember before that, they can remember things in their first year of life. Then they can remember actually being born, and then they can remember being in the womb, and then you can remember previous lives. So that's what I mean by personal experience. The only way to be really and so His Holiness says that personal experience is the best way to know whether something is true or not. So just in ordinary life, through personal experience, if you go back to your home, you've been away for a while, when you get back home, you open the front door, you know where everything is, you know which room is which, where you left this, where you left that, what your way around your kitchen. I mean, or, if I go back to Australia, sometimes I like to drive around the neighborhood where I grew up and see, I remember how things were and how things have changed, and the places I used to hang out with when I was a kid and things like that. No one can tell me, oh, you haven't been here before, you're making it up. But I know, and I can tell you where and describe all these different things. So, so going back into previous lives is kind of like that. That you were there. It was your experience, and so that's the only way to be truly convinced But, it takes a lot of effort, years maybe, to develop single point of concentration and whole change of lifestyle to form the basis of doing that kind of meditation. So, you really need to become a professional meditator in order to have that kind of experience. So then if we don't have that kind of experience, then the next one is logical deduction. So I'm not going to go into that now, but there are a lot of reasons for understanding the mind is separate from the body, and the mind is impermanent, therefore it's a product of causes, and the principal cause of an effect has to be similar in nature to the effect, and the mind is separate from the body. It's clear and knowing, so the principal cause of the mind has to also be clear and knowing, formless, and with the ability to perceive objects. And so, in other words, the principal cause of the mind has to be mind, the previous state of mind. And if you can see that impermanent phenomena are the product of causes, and the causes, they don't arise from nowhere, they don't arise from nothing, the mind doesn't come from the brain, because the brain is physical and the mind is non-physical. So, a physical object can't be the cause of something that's not physical. So if the mind has to rise from a previous state of mind, and that previous state of mind has to arise from the previous state of mind and back, you can see there can never have been a first moment of mind. The mind is in fact beginningless. So that's very briefly the sort of logical way to think about it. And then there's what Ribush mentioned here first, is scriptural authority, reliable authority. So the Buddha taught that there are past and future lives. The Buddha taught there are previous lives. The Buddha taught reincarnation or rebirth. And so then, if understanding that is beyond us, we have to study the Buddha's teachings that we can understand. And there are so many of them, and that we can see that what the Buddha taught was true, and that he wouldn't make stuff up. And so the reason we don't understand the mind is beginningless is not because the Buddha is wrong, but because our ignorance. I experienced that myself in my first meditation course. Rinpoche was giving these teachings, and I'd never heard this stuff before. And, it just sounded so far-fetched to me, a lot of it. So I was always interrupting him, asking questions and challenging him. And I thought, he's this young Himalayan monk. I'm this kind of university-educated doctor. I know much more than better than he does. So, so he was very patient, and he'd try to answer my questions, or like that. Then eventually, other students got sick of me interrupting the teaching, so they told me to shut up. I shut up. And I started writing down my questions in the back of my notebook. And then as the course went on, 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then I was able to cross the questions off, because, I was thinking that I was the person Buddhism had been waiting for 2,500 years to prove it wrong. And in fact, it became clear that what was wrong was my ignorance, and that given time, I could understand more and more, because in time, things can be understood if you apply yourself to trying to understand them. So it's not just scriptural authority either, because there are many children who remember their past lives. And there's an academic called Ian Stevenson from University of Virginia who wrote a book. He wrote a couple of books on this. One was called 20 Cases suggestive of reincarnation. Actually, he was convinced they proved reincarnation, but the publisher, University Press, wouldn't allow him to say that. So they called it suggestive of reincarnation. But he went into the, children remember the past lives. They investigated their stories from past lives. The children taken back to where they grew up, where they said they grew up, or, explained how they died in that previous life. And then they remembered by name people from their previous lives. They could guide the researchers to the house where they lived when they were taken back to the town where they grew up, things like that. So all these cases were investigated, and the only logical conclusion was that this child's mind was the continuation of that previous life's mind. And so that's how, that's another way. And also hypnotic regression. Some people have remembered their previous lives, and their memories under hypnosis have been proven to be true from that previous life. So there are other ways of not just scriptural authority, but other people's experience who explain, that can help guide you to the right understanding that there are previous lives. You're just taking that example of an instance of knowing how whether something's true or not. So personal experience, logical deduction, and others' experience. So here, when Padampa Sangye says, as parents, all beings six realms have cared for you, Lama Zopa Rinpoche's explanation is so logical reasons. So he says, because of beginningless mind, samsaric transmigration is beginningless, and my previous. So this is written as a way for us to meditate on the topic. So it's in the first person. This is how we should think in meditation. Because of beginningless mind, samsaric transmigration is beginningless, and my previous lives are numberless. But due to different individual karmas, my present mother has not been my mother in all previous lives. For instance, when this mother was an elephant, I was an ant, born from a mother ant. When I was a yak, she was a flea, and so on. So that's the first point to meditate on. Second, however, the mother of my present human life has been my human mother numberless times. As Nagarjuna said, if you divide the earth up into pieces the size of a juniper berry, a mother has been a mother in previous lives more times than the number of berries. She has also been my mother when we were turkeys, hens, cows, etc., countless times each. So whatever form of life there is born from a mother, our present mother has been that as well as a human mother. Then third point, of all the realms of samsara, there is none in which I was never born. So, this is not our first human life, and the dogs and cats, not the ones they're eating, that have been born numberless times, also in all the different realms. I have been born in every single place throughout the entire extension of space. So, the 6 realms, hungry ghost realms, the hell realms, the animal realms, human, the sura realms, those 2 God realms. We've been born in each of those as every kind of being in those kind of realms numberless times. Each and every physical form of existence, even the most ugly and miserable of all, seen or not seen by me, I've taken numberless times. There are even forms of existence that, you can see online these different sentient beings that live in the depths of the deepest oceans. Have you ever seen those? If you Google life forms it's unbelievable what animals can look like. There's different. It's just I mean, the most creative artists could never come up with some of these, And we've been in those kind of animals infinite times, each one as weird and as amazing as they seem. Not to mention the fleas and mosquitoes and snakes and rabbits and all the other forms of life that we can see. Finally, the time when sentient beings began to be mother does not exist. Such a time is not the object of even the omniscient mind of the enlightened being, so it cannot be that of the limited minds of ordinary beings. In other words, sentient beings have been mother since beginningless time. So what is true as above for my present mother is also true for all other sentient beings. So all other sentient beings' mothers have been their mother in the same way. So it's, mind-blowing sort of infinite example. So, these are points, topics of analytical meditation that we have to think about, understand intellectually, and then realize is true. So, that's how the whole Rim is made up, of these thousands of steps, thousands of meditations to meditate, to understand intellectually, to analyze, to see if they're true or not, and then to focus single-pointedly on. So that's how we develop the three wisdoms of hearing, contemplation, and meditation. And so the way in which we understand all these different things to be true is through personal experience, logical deduction, or scriptural authority, or the experience of others. Okay, well, we did one verse. I think it's time, sorry. Okay, well, I hope it's been interesting, if not useful. And since we, started by generating bodhicitta, and since we've been, discussing the Buddha's teachings, we've certainly created merit. So we want to dedicate that to redirect it, or make sure it gets directed towards the enlightenment of all sentient beings, and is protected from this merit, which is very hard to create, very precious, to protect it from destruction by anger or wrong views. So we dedicate it. So if we do the short dedication prayers book.
Saji perki juxing me top tram re rubbling jini degin padi sangye jing du ming te uwagi doku nam dag jing la chur pa shu jetsun lame kutse rapten ching nam katrin le chok chur gi padang lo sang ten pedren me sasungi roe mun sel tak tu nek yu chik hidam guru ratna mandalakam niryatayami. a short, long life prayer for His Holiness at the bottom of the page. In that snow mountain encircled land, source of every benefit and joy, may Lord Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezig remain in life till samsara's end. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who extensively clarifies the path that unifies emptiness and compassion, to the lotus in the hand, Lord Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as a bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please return swiftly. At the bottom of the page, the prayer of dedication. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha's state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Mikme tse wei ter chen chen rezik, dreame kien pei wang po jam pel yang, gang chen ke pei su yen song kapa, lo sang drag pei jabla so de. Thank you very much, Nick.
Okay, yeah, thank you, everybody. Just again, think because of this merit, may I quickly reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And thank you. Hope to see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nick.
Thank you, Nick. Have a good week.
Bye, everyone.